Hey everybody, I'm Jesse, and welcome to another edition of Gen X Thinks. And today I'm going to talk about child safety. Child safety back when I was a kid versus child safety now. And this is a viewer-inspired edition. I'd like to thank Chris Mills for suggesting this topic. I think this topic is relevant in every day and age, really, because child safety is an important thing, whether there's too much of it or not enough. Either way, we can run into problems. And I'm just going to go ahead and read the entire comment left by Chris, so y'all can get an idea of all the context here, okay? And Chris says, I don't like certain aspects of how you were raised. You didn't cry over your injuries or your parents would give you another one. That just sounds totally unbelievable today. I do like, however, the freedom aspect of how you were just left to get on. I would have found it hard as a blind child. I know I would. But for a sighted child, that would be amazing. Just total freedom, not being monitored. As a blind child, I would have found that hard, though, because you're very limited to what you can do if you're blind. You can't really go playing outside on your own, especially with the amount of cars and transport there are now. It only limits you to playing a musical instrument, but not everybody wants to hear that every day. I did find it hard as a teenager because I was kind of raised similarly. I'd love you to make a video on health and safety, how far you think it's gone today. All right, Chris. I understand what you're saying about the blindness thing, and I get it. It's tough. Tough to go outside. But back then, you've really got to kind of use your imagination now, because one thing I do realize is that it is difficult to put yourself in a different time, in your mind. It's just hard to imagine how it was back then. But back then, back then we called people with physical handicaps, we just called them handicapped. That word handicap got out of favor or whatever. Now I don't know what they're calling people with physical limitations anymore. Disabled maybe, or I don't know. But we used to just call them handicapped, and that was a perfectly okay thing to call them. So that's what I'm going to use here. But there were handicapped kids back then. There were blind kids, wheelchair, children with Down syndrome, just any kind of disability like that made it more difficult, okay? Now, in those situations, those kids still came outside and played. They played with their friends. They weren't alone. We used our imaginations, and we found ways to include these kids. That's just how it was. You had your group of friends, and when they come by to pick you up and go outside, you went outside. Now, overprotective parents, there were overprotective parents back then. There definitely were. Some of them would make their kid wear a helmet outside no matter what. They just wore a bicycle helmet all the time outside because the parents were concerned. Then you had your really overprotective parents that wouldn't let their kids go outside really without adult supervision. But those were rare. Those parents back then would fit in great today. Overprotective parents back then would fit in great today. Overprotective parents today, I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. I mean, like, to be overprotective today, you just have to put a kid in a closet and lock the door and just feed them, fish fillets under the door or something. But we did have overprotective parents back then, but they weren't common. Okay, most kids, blind kids, disabled kids, they come out and played, and that was it. They played with their group of friends. Now we had imagination back then. We would have to use our imagination and come up with ways to include these kids, and we did. That's just what it was. Now, if I had brothers and sisters, if I had been blind, they would have included me. They would have tied, tin cans to their around their neck or something so that I could hear them coming, and that kind of stuff. They would have included me. I have no doubt. There's no way that I just can't see it. No matter what kind of handicap I had, if me just staying inside and my brothers and sisters leaving me inside and my friends leaving me inside while they went out and played. It didn't happen back then. You went out and played with your friends, and your friends looked out for you. They didn't let you walk out in the street or do any of that and anything else that would get you really hurt. I mean, they'd let you skin your knee, they'd let you do the same dumb shit they were doing, but they wouldn't let you run out in traffic. And when I was a kid, my dad was a horse trainer, so even blind, you can ride a horse blind because the horse is your eyes as long as it's a well-trained horse. So I would have ridden horses a lot back then too anyway. So I would have still done a lot of the same things that I did. You wouldn't be able to just go out all by yourself. But most kids didn't. Most kids didn't go outside and just play by themselves. But back then, even if you wanted to, most parents would let you. Yeah, they would have just, told you to stay in the yard playing in the dirt with your cars or whatever you were doing. And you just had to sit there in the sunshine and not leave. But most parents would have let you do that back then. I'm almost positive. I know mine would have. If I had been blind, they would have just, and I told them I wanted to go outside, they would have just sat me down out there in the yard and said, "Don't leave," and then went back in to watch soap operas or whatever. So that's how it was back then, and your life would have been completely different. It just would have been. You would have gotten hurt. Maybe you would have broken an arm, but a lot of kids that weren't handicapped got hurt and broke arms and broke legs and stuff. We wore casts a lot. You didn't go to school without seeing at least one kid in a cast, wearing a cast on their arm or, hobbling on crutches. Everybody got hurt back then, not just the handicapped kids. So yeah, you would have got hurt. You would have had some injuries. You would have been to see the doctor a couple times, got sewn up or whatever. But that was how it was back then. That wasn't a big deal. All right. So for a little context here, I was born in 1971. And I spent my childhood years in the 70s. Now in the 80s, I started getting a little older in high school and all that. And the whole child safety thing didn't really apply to me anymore as I got up into my teens. So my reference for this is the 70s. The 80s changed a little bit. Not a lot, but a little. They were a little different. For that, you'd want to talk to somebody born in the late 70s or the early 80s. But a lot of us Gen-Xers were born in the late 60s and the early 70s. So that's what I'll speak about is the 70s. Now, growing up in the 70s, there was almost no safety regulations, almost none for kids. We could ride in vehicles without car seats, without seat belts. You could just lay a baby down in the seat next to you. And they had these big bench seats in all the cars back then. They didn't have bucket seats and everything like they do now. And they had big bench seats. And you just lay the baby down next to you. We'd ride in the back of pickups. All of us kids, me, my brothers and sisters, cousins and all that, we'd all jump in the back of a pickup. I remember leaning on the tailgate and throwing marbles down as we went down the road, throwing marbles down at the pavement and watching the marbles bounce. Now, we had to make sure that no car was coming behind us. There was no traffic behind us because we couldn't hit a car with the marble. We'd have got our asses busted. But yeah, I remember many times, we'd see who could get the marble to bounce the highest and bounce the furthest as we went down the road at, 30, 40 miles an hour. And we were leaning on the tailgate. And that was perfectly acceptable behavior back then. The adults would see us, and they wouldn't think anything about it. Nowadays, you can't do it. You can't put a kid in the back of a pickup. Yeah, like that, and just drive around. That's just illegal, probably, in probably everywhere now, I would suppose. It was it dangerous? Yeah, but I never saw anyone in my group get hurt riding in the back of a pickup. I'm sure there were a couple instances where children got hurt, but I just never heard about it back then. It never happened to any of us. Of course, the adults, when they had kids in the back of the truck, they would drive more carefully, but other than that, no. It was just the thing. It was the way it was. It wasn't frowned upon. Nobody gave you a second look. You drive down the road, and another pickup with full of kids would pass you. It was just, and you wave to each other. It was just, how it was. And growing up like that, it didn't seem strange or out of place. It was just the way it was. It was normal. Now, growing up the way you did, Chris, the tight control and the overprotectiveness, that is your normal. So it's hard to imagine how free it was back then. But yeah, we had a whole lot of freedom, especially in the 70s as little children. And I don't know if you can say you have too much freedom, but as children, yeah, maybe we did have a little too much. Maybe it could have been, tightened up a little bit. But that's the thing with that. Always, in every area of life, once they start passing laws and restrictions, they don't stop. They never stop. And it just gets tighter and tighter until we have what we see today, where the people are calling the cops if they just see a kid walking home from the park, completely safely, completely competent to walk home by themselves. But if I just saw that the other day, where the authorities were called because 2 children were walking home from the park by themselves. Now that's ridiculous. If the child isn't in danger, then I don't know. But back in the 70s, you didn't really do that. You didn't call the cops on your neighbor even for child abuse. I don't know if a lot of people wouldn't call the cops, even if they actually witnessed someone abusing their child. They probably wouldn't have called the cops back then. If it got too bad, they might intervene themselves. But to call the authorities, that really had to be really bad, So the cops just weren't called a lot back then like they are now. Now people will dial 911 because they see 2 kids walking down the street. So a lot has changed. And I think we might have had a little bit too much freedom back then, but now I don't think kids have enough. And the what we call now Karens, who are calling the authorities on people just for, because their kids are walking home from the park. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. It's gone too far. And back in the 70s, we didn't wear safety equipment. We didn't wear helmets and knee pads and elbow pads and all that stuff, even, when we were riding bikes. Nowadays, even if a kid does ride a bike, he's got to put all this safety equipment on and stuff. And not only that, but if someone's mom made them wear that kind of stuff back then, we'd make fun of them. That's just the way it was. The stuff looked stupid. And Brad Harris has mentioned it a couple times, how stupid bicycle helmets are. So this one goes to you, Brad. Yeah, I know you despise bicycle helmets, and I'm there with you, buddy. I've never worn one. I don't know if I've ever put a bicycle helmet on my head. I've ridden bikes a lot, but I don't think I've ever put one on my head. Yeah, we would make fun of kids that wore that shit. We would just make fun of them, and nobody wanted to wear them. They were uncool. It wasn't cool to wear that safety gear. It made you look like you were scared of bumping your head or something, or scraping your elbow, and nobody wanted to be the one to be afraid to get hurt. But And that has changed drastically. Just that perception of wearing all that safety equipment and stuff. Now, nobody looked down on the handicapped kids that wore that stuff, because, we all knew that they could hurt themselves bumping into something, but those overprotective parents, they even made some kids wear that stuff back then, although it was completely uncool. The safety equipment doesn't look cool today, but it has come a long way. At least they've kind of streamlined it a little bit. Back then, bicycle helmets and knee pads and all that stuff, they were big and bulbous, and even the elbow pads were really big and puffy, and they did look really bad back then. So if you were made to wear that stuff by your parents, normally you would just go around the block and then take that stuff off, but because you didn't want your friends making fun of you. And it wasn't just our parents. A lot of people want to act like we're blaming our parents for everything and all this, and that's, and we were ignored and all this by our parents. No, it was society at large. It was teachers, it was police officers. Nobody cared back then. And when I say that, I'm not saying like that was a bad thing, okay? I loved it. I loved the freedom. I loved being able to just bust out the door and go running down the street and through the woods or whatever and do whatever I wanted. I didn't want them to care. Okay? If they would have tried to micromanage into my playtime and stuff, that would have sucked. I didn't want them to care. It was great. It was wonderful. Okay, so I'm not saying from my end them not caring was abuse or any shit like that. I'm just saying it was a fact they didn't care. Okay, that's undeniable. Out on the playground, I remember in like fourth grade or something like that, third or fourth grade, we used to play a game called Crack the Whip, where we'd all hold hands and get in a line, and then the lead person would start running and do S shapes and running in circles and stuff. And the last person in line, would be hanging on, and their feet would be in the air, and they would just be swinging around. Because of the force of the motion, the physics, the last person in line would get all that momentum built up through the line, and they would and we call it Crack the Whip, and it's exactly like a whip, exactly like it sounds. And eventually that kid would go flying off. I mean, almost like they were shot out of a cannon. And I remember playing that. I remember flying through the air and rolling and tumbling in the dirt and scratching and cutting myself. And that was on the playground at school. And the teachers were sitting there watching us, and they thought it was okay. They weren't our parents, they weren't our grandparents. They were just teachers. And they thought that was acceptable behavior for children. That's just the way it was. To stop us, from doing that, then they'd have a bunch of hyperactive kids in the classroom. But instead, they let us go out there and burn off some energy. And when by the time we got back to class and got settled down, we were calm. They didn't have a bunch of kids in there with couldn't sit down and looking at their phones and stuff. They were calm. So, yeah, nursing injuries and stuff. Still had injuries from the day or two before from playing Crack the Whip. So, yeah, it was a complete different thing, and it was all through society where they were just more relaxed back then. You could do what you wanted as long as you weren't physically attacking another kid. And even then, a lot of times, they would, as long as you didn't have a weapon, if it was just a fist fight, they'd let it go on for a little bit and see if one kid quit and see who won or whatever, and that would be it. They wouldn't call parents. You wouldn't go to the principal. No cops would be called. Nothing like that. It was just a completely different world, a completely different mindset. And yeah, we weren't tracked or monitored in any way. Zero tracking, zero monitoring. when it started getting close to dark, sometimes a parent would come out on the porch and yell for their kid or honk the horn on the car to get the kids' attention, to get them to come home. That was it. The parents had no idea where their kids were. They didn't care. I mean, they let the kids go and do whatever they did. They let the kids play. And that was just par for the course. That was normal back then. Nowadays, you've got, trackers on your phone, and the kids probably have apps to subjugate that or subvert that, to make it look like they're somewhere that they're not and stuff by now, I'm sure. But there are actually, I saw where they're getting kids the RFID chips in their arms so they can be tracked and that stuff now. And to me, I don't know, that's a little overboard. No, that's way overboard. I just think kids should be free to be kids, A lot of my friends grew up perfectly normal and well-adjusted. I hope I have grown up perfectly normal and well-adjusted. But that freedom, I can't imagine growing up in a world where that freedom isn't a memory, and looking back at your childhood and you didn't have that freedom. All you had was whatever was in your house. Me and my friends explored all over the place. I talked to Brad Harris on a video before where he told a story about how him and his friends went out looking for a cave, and they did it over several summers, and they eventually found it. And those kind of memories, they're invaluable. You can't put a price on that kind of stuff. I mean, Brad went out and actually did real Goonie stuff, looking for a cave, and it took him and his friends a couple of years to accomplish it. But they came back the next summer and went out, and did it again. And that's something you could have taken your blind friend to do, You're just exploring. All you do is, tie a rope to him, and you tie a rope to yourself and make sure you don't let him run into a tree. And people did that. Kids did that. That's just what we did. We wasn't going to let our friend sit inside all day just because he couldn't see or he couldn't, whatever. So, yeah. That's just the way it was back then. You took your lumps, whether you could see or whether you couldn't. So that and there's a lot to be said for that. I think there's a lot of great memories that we have from back then because we had all that freedom. Because I know I played video games all my life, and when you play a video game, you have good memories of that. But my best memories of playing a video game was the actual camaraderie with my friend, not the game itself. I played a lot of video games, and they just blur into each other. I don't have great memories of video games, not very many. I have great memories of interacting with my friends and doing cool stuff with my friends back when I was a kid. And one of those things was playing video games, but still, it was the hanging out with my buddy and playing with my buddy, whether it was video games or horseback riding or exploring or whatever. And you just need freedom to be able to do that stuff. So in summary, it's really difficult to express what that freedom was like to the younger generation because they just live without it totally. They don't have any reference point to attach to and say, oh, I understand that. You know what I mean? Having that much freedom as a kid is a difficult thing to understand. But we had it. We did. We actually lived like that. And it was great. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade all that danger and all the cuts and bruises and bleeding. I would not trade that for today's life of online and safety and all that. I just wouldn't do it. Not for myself. I wouldn't trade it. And I don't think most Gen Xers would either. I think most Gen Xers would stand with me and and live, if we had to redo it all, we'd live a life of freedom and fun and danger rather than a freedom of control and safety. So, yeah. I in a lot of ways, I feel sorry for the younger generation because they don't get to experience that level of freedom, and because, I don't know, in my opinion, children are supposed to be free to be kids, free to make mistakes and learn from them. Whether, even if it's a broken arm, you learn not to do that dumb stuff again, right? If you bump your head, you learn not to bump your head again, whatever it is. If you wreck your bike trying to jump a ramp, you make the ramp better next time. You don't quit jumping. you just learn better ways to make ramps. All right, and I'll leave you there with that. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and comment. If you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member, I'll put that link down in the description, or you can head over to the channel page and become a member that way. If you'd like to support the channel directly, you can do so by clicking on that super thanks button down there. Or you can head over to Buy Me a Cup of Coffee and buy me a cup of coffee. I appreciate those of you who do that. Thank you very much. If you're interested in Gen X gear, we got some pretty cool stuff over there at Redbubble. Gen X Thinks and Gen X branded stuff, t-shirts, coffee mugs, stickers, all kinds of cool stuff over there. But I'll put that link down in the description for those of you who are interested. If you can't or don't want to support the channel in any of those ways, you can always do so by sharing these videos on your social media. That helps out one hell of a lot, so thank you very much. I really do appreciate those of you who share these videos. If you have any ideas for future episodes of Gen X Things, please put those down in the comments. Or you can email us, and the email is genxthings@gmail.com. Thanks again to Chris, who inspired this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so, and I hope all the others who see this video enjoy it. Thank you very much. And as always, stay frosty, Gen X, and I'll see you on the next one.